President-elect Trump taps FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr as chairman of that agency, saying that Commissioner Carr is a warrior for free speech and has fought against the regulatory lawfare that has stifled Americans' freedoms and held back our economy. He will end the regulatory onslaught that has been crippling America's job creators and innovators and ensure that the FCC delivers for rural America. Brendan Carr joins us now. I'm particularly interested in rural America. What are your top three, besides that, top three to-do items if you get confirmed?
Yeah, thanks so much, Dana. I want to start by expressing my thanks and appreciation again to President Trump and to congratulate him again on his historic election victory. I mean, it's one for the history books, if you think about it, from the lawfare that he overcame to literally being shot, not just shot at, but being shot. And for me, as I go forward, the first thing is to get together with the president's team and make sure that I 100% understand his agenda. After all, it's going to be his administration, and it's going to be his agenda that people should be pushing. From my perspective, there's a couple of top issues. Number one is looking at tech censorship. You know, free speech is the bedrock of our democracy, and there's been this unprecedented surge in censorship over the last couple of years, and we need to restore Americans' First Amendment rights. Number two is to look at our approach to media. You know, Jeff Bezos just recently did an op-ed where he said that Americans don't trust the news media. He said now they're the least trusted of all. And I think he's speaking a lot of truth there. So I think the status quo, particularly when it comes to legacy media, needs to change. And three, we have a real opportunity to get the economy going and creating jobs. When President Trump came in 2017, we were behind the eight ball when it came to communications policy, and he turned things around. And that's exactly what is going to happen again. We need to free up more spectrum. We need to do permitting reform. You talk about rural broadband. That's the key there. And number three is the space economy. I'm down here in South Padre Island right now. There's going to be another Starship launch later today. And it simply cannot take longer to move permitting paper from one desk at an agency to another than it does to build and launch these rockets. So we're going to unleash America's private sector again.
What can the FCC do to help legacy media?
You know, there's a lot the FCC can do. Broadcasters are differently situated than other speakers. They get free access to a valuable public resource, the airwaves, and they're licensed by the FCC. And the exchange for that is they have to serve the public interest. I think it's important that we take another look at that and we reinvigorate it. There's also a news distortion complaint at the FCC still having to do with CBS, and CBS has a transaction before the FCC. And I'm pretty confident that that news distortion complaint over the CBS 60 Minutes transcript is something that's likely to arise in the context of the FCC's review of that transaction.
Forbes magazine had this headline: how Elon Musk could benefit from Trump's FCC nominee Brendan Carr. Why would they say that he would benefit, and how would you respond to that headline?
Well, if you look at the last couple of years, you know, President Biden stood at the White House podium a couple years ago and said Elon Musk is worth being looked into. And ever since then, the regulatory agencies have launched unprecedented lawfare. You know, the FCC revoked unlawfully an $800 million award to Elon Musk. Every single agency started investigating him. And so I think that it's time for the American government to not give people differential treatment based on their last name. And everybody is going to get a fair shake from the government going forward.
You also had this tweet at one point that the FCC's most recent budget request said that promoting DEI was the agency's second highest strategic goal. Starting next year, the FCC will end its promotion of DEI. Tell me more.
Yeah, look, we need to get back to common sense in the government. The idea that the Federal Communications Commission lists as its second highest strategic priority promoting DEI, there's no place for that. And when the transition is complete, when we come in, the FCC is going to end its promotion of DEI. We're going to focus on our core mission, rural broadband, accelerating our permitting for the satellite industry. Those are the steps we're going to take, promoting our national security.
Well, enjoy the space launch, the rocket launch
today.
today. Enjoy that, and thank you for coming on the program. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Anna.
Okay, Brendan. And we are awaiting a crucial decision in the New York criminal case against President-elect Donald Trump. We're coming up on the deadline for prosecutors to tell Judge Juan Merchan how they want to move forward with that case now that Trump is heading back to the White House. And welcome again to a brand new hour of America's Newsroom. I'm Dana Perino.
Morning to you. I don't know what he's going to do, but we're about to find out, right?
Ready? I was kind of, I really don't know.
Right. I'm Bill Hemmer. Good morning at home. Judge Merchan has repeatedly delayed key decisions in this case. Sentencing is scheduled for 1 week from now. Fox host and former federal prosecutor Trey Gowdy earlier with us saying it's time for the judge and the prosecution to throw in the towel on this case.
I've never seen a more pro-prosecution judge. You can't sentence him because he's then a convicted felon. He hasn't had an evidentiary hearing on presidential immunity. Look, the prosecution said there were competing interests. Not anymore. The competition's over. They lost. So he needs to end the case. He won. The competition's over.
Okay, that was that. And now we bring in our legal panel with Andy McCarthy, Jonathan Turley, and Carrie Urban. As we await this, it could come any moment. We'll be patient here. Andy, what is your best guess, if you want to start there?
I think they're going to delay. I'd be surprised if, at this point, Bragg dismissed the case. I agree with the thrust of what Trey was saying. But I think the difference here compared to some of the other cases is that Bragg feels like he didn't lose. He feels like he won the case at trial. So it would be difficult for him to swallow hard and dismiss it at this point. But he really hasn't completely won because important things haven't happened here yet. There hasn't been a sentencing. There hasn't been a judgment or conviction. And he doesn't have a clear path to get there because even if Judge Merchan rules his way on immunity, they're looking at a long appeal.
And Jonathan Turley, this is a statement from the Trump spokesman, Stephen Chung, after the delay last Tuesday, saying that the American people have reelected President Trump with an overwhelming mandate to make America great again. It is now abundantly clear that Americans want an immediate end to the weaponization of our justice system, including this case. And it might not be all Americans, certainly, but for those that voted for President Trump, indeed. And maybe some Democrats also think, let's move on. What do you think?
Oh, I think that's a general feeling that this has been a three-ring circus. The federal case, the Georgia case, and the New York case. The federal cases are shutting down. Georgia is going nowhere. And yet you've got Judge Merchan here. And many people feel he's continuing this long after the attractions were put back in their cages and the audience has left. And so there would be a great sigh of relief. I just don't expect it. I think that the judge will view this as a verdict by this jury that he's not just going to set aside. I don't think that holding this in abeyance for 4 years is a good option. That you cannot have a president who's pending sentencing for 4 years, in my view. You know, the real problem here for the court will be any sentence that limits his movement, including a sentence of jail time, which I think we all agree is highly unlikely. He could impose, for example, a fine and not trigger those conflicts and allow Trump then to appeal this case. Keep in mind, I think that the judge really made an unholy mess of this case. I think there are layers of reversible error here, and those haven't even been reviewed, let alone the sentencing itself.
That's an interesting point, Carrie. Regardless of what the judge does, this is wide open for appeal. How long that takes, we don't know.
You know, one thing we do know, though, is that Judge Merchan is a political animal. And we know this because he donated to Joe Biden in 2020. Now, critics will say, well, it was $15 or $20, doesn't matter. But Dana, you and I have spoken about this before. It's that he did it at all. You know, I clerked for the Court of Appeals of Virginia. That's a state appellate court. And it was shocking to me when I found that out, that he donated while Trump cases were percolating in his district and could come before him, because it gave such a poor appearance. So I say that to make the point that this man does consider politics. And I think it would be incredibly politically foolish for him to not take one of the off-ramps that has been given to him, whether it's via immunity, whether it's the fact that Donald Trump was reelected, because does Juan Merchan really want to be responsible for Republicans, say, winning again in 2028? Because we know this lawfare strategy just didn't work.
Andy, what do you expect to hear from the Trump team today?
I think they're in the mode at this point of encouraging Bragg. There's a lot of talk by people who I think were not informed well about what was happening today, about the idea that Judge Merchan was kind of dragging this out. In fact, remember last week, it was Bragg's office and the Trump team collectively or duly who were fine with the idea of having a 1-week postponement. So I think the Trump team thinks things are trending in their direction, whether this ends up as a dismissal or a long delay. One way or the other, it's not going to end up in a conviction and sentencing, they think. So they're probably going to lay low in the tall grass and see what happens.
Interesting. To both of you, Professor Turley, you can go first if you like. Can a New York judge set aside a conviction before the sentencing?
Well, yeah, there's grounds that you can take one of those off-ramps that Carrie would...
Keep going, Turley.
There are off-ramps that what Carrie referred to. The easiest off-ramp, I suppose, or at least the most obvious, is to say that the trial itself was undermined by the later Supreme Court decision on immunity. They did, in fact, use evidence that came out of the White House and evidence that probably would have been barred under that opinion. Now, normally I would say that that really doesn't represent much of a stumbling block for the court because they had all the other evidence that they used. But the prosecutors made this a closer question by emphasizing that very evidence in their closing argument. So they sort of doubled down on it. Does that give the court an easy out? Well, it could. I mean, he could say, look, I can't unravel how that evidence affected the jury when the prosecutors were emphasizing it in the trial and at the very end. Most of us expected that he would likely say it was harmless and still say that the jury verdicts stand.
Andy, what's your view?
Yeah, I think we have to be mindful of the fact that the occasion for this, the reason that we're having these proceedings, is because Trump has a pending post-trial motion to vacate the verdict. So obviously the judge can grant that for whatever reason he grants it. I do think, though, what Kerry said before adds an interesting element to this, because I believe this would have gone one way if Trump had not been elected yet. But now that he's been elected, I believe the political incentives here, especially for Merchan, are very different. He's not looking anymore to send a signal to the electorate. That bell's been rung. Can't do anything about that now.
All right. If you three would stand by, because we're awaiting this, it could happen any second, and we will bring it to you as soon as we have it, and we're grateful to have you here. We want to get you to this as well, because right now the head of FEMA is on Capitol Hill, where lawmakers are finally getting a chance to ask about the response to Hurricanes Helene and Milton and disaster readiness, as well as claims about partisan bias within the agency against Trump supporters, like if you had a sign for Trump in your yard. Senior congressional correspondent Chad Pergram is live on the Hill, where this morning's hearing is about to begin. Chad.
Dana, good morning. This is the first time that Deanne Criswell has spoken to lawmakers since the storms, both the political ones and the weather ones. She did not say anything when she arrived in the hall to this hearing today. Now expect a grilling for Criswell today. Some lawmakers have questions about the responses to Hurricanes Helene and Milton. Others are probing whether there were politics at play. The question is whether FEMA employees were instructed to bypass homes with Trump signs.
We just want to ask her if this is an isolated incident or if this is a pattern. We've spoken to other FEMA employees, and we fear that this is a pattern of behavior that's happened over the last couple of years. But again, I'm going to let the director speak for herself, and we'll go from there.
One FEMA whistleblower was fired. Marnie Washington claims that FEMA made her a scapegoat. But Washington says she just followed orders about visiting pro-Trump homes.
Some were registered. Some did receive case inquiries and updates. Yeah. Some of them came outside and said, "Hi, I appreciate what you're doing. I would like to participate." And then some were very vocal and firm that they didn't want anything to do with FEMA, and they thought that we were crooks.
This comes as President Biden requested $98 billion to cover the damages of Hurricanes Helene and Milton. It would also reload FEMA's fund for future disasters.
Speaker Johnson said that getting disaster aid would be a priority upon his Congress's return this month. I hope the Speaker honors that commitment and works with Democrats to get disaster aid done as soon as we can. We should not kick the can down the road nor withhold vital resources.
Now, some conservatives want offsets to that new spending, and they hope to attach that to that big spending bill at the end of the year. Dana?
All right, Chet, keep an eye on it for us. Thank you.
So elsewhere on the Hill, the National Institutes of Health director now testifying in another committee about the NIH's oversight protocols as Robert F. Kennedy's nomination looms large. Alexandria Hoff watching that in Washington, D.C. And what are they saying there? Alex, good morning.
Hi, Bill. Good to be with you. Well, you have current director Monica Bertagnoli. She's only spent a year in the job. She's going to be testifying today. She was tasked with rebuilding trust following COVID-19 missteps. Well, that rebuilding is going to happen, but likely not with her at the helm. One name reportedly being considered to replace Bertagnoli under the incoming administration is Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, according to the Washington Post. The physician and professor was vilified in 2020 for being critical of COVID protocols and his part in writing an open letter during lockdown orders urging those to be lifted. Here's what he had to say about that.
Powers that be inside the federal government decided they did not like our declaration one bit. The head of the NIH wrote to Tony Fauci 4 days after he wrote it, calling for a devastating takedown of the declaration and of me.
Many of his views since then have been validated. And as we know, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he's been nominated to lead the Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees the NIH. Kennedy seeks to divert half of its $48 billion budget to preventative and holistic health care. He says he's not out to eliminate any agencies, just corruption.
I've sued all those agencies. I have a PhD in corporate corruption, and that's what I do. And once they're not corrupt, once Americans are getting good science and are allowed to make their own choices, they're going to get a lot healthier.
So one of Kennedy's priorities within the NIH is to stop funding studies where there are financial conflicts of interest. A 2019 ProPublica investigation found more than 8,000 federally funded researchers reported having stakes in biotech and drug-making companies. Bill.
Okay, more to come, and we'll wait for that. Thanks, Alexandria Hoff on the Hill. Thank you.
It's another step up the escalation ladder, and nobody knows where this is going. President Trump is talking grand strategy here. How do we get both sides to the table to end this war?
The Biden administration's escalation in Ukraine prompting Vladimir Putin to revise Russia's nuclear doctrine, what that means for the West.
Also, meanwhile, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu out of Israel revealing last month's Israeli counterattack did damage part of the nuclear program in Iran. And we've got some aerial photos to show you that coming up.
And a government report detailing how the Biden administration lost track of tens of thousands of migrant children, how Republicans are pushing for accountability.